Hello and welcome back to the studio. Today's Bob Ross classic painting is Valley View. Well, my version of it at least. And this was a suggestion by one of you, my lovely YouTube viewers. So I thought, yes, that's a nice painting and it gives me a chance to work on some palette knife techniques because that I think is one of the things that gives people most problems. So I thought I'll make the video a little bit longer and concentrate on getting this to work properly for you. You can see from the thumbnail, it's all about getting the paint on the knife right in the first place. So, you know the score. Sit back, relax, cup of tea, something stronger, palette knife at the ready, and let's see if we can paint better mountains together. Happy painting, people! So here's my canvas, 16 inches by 20. The first step is to put some gesso on here. I want some background trees. Gesso is a water-based product that you can apply before putting on oils. I'll be using a small foam brush to make the tree shapes. I want to save this section for my mountain. I go into a small amount of black gesso with my foam brush and I want to just put on a few markers. This is just to keep me in position. I'll put a few little suggestions where I might paint my trees. It just acts as a guide. Now, let's make a bunch of trees. Just little downward strokes with the point of the foam brush. Occasionally I let my brush run out of paint so I get some slightly more faded looking trees. Again, this can be very random. Now let's fill in the rest of it with a nice solid colour. I leave it to dry for at least an hour. Now time for some oil paints. I'll be using Bob Ross Liquid White for the top section and Bob Ross Liquid Clear for the lower section. I'll be using them from these little airtight pots for ease of application. I've got an old 1-inch brush that's well worn down and I'll be using this to apply liquid white to my sky. You want a small amount, just enough to make the background sky wet. Remember, this is a wet on wet oil painting technique, so I want to apply one wet paint on top of another at this stage. Allow the colour to run out as it reaches the tree line, but don't be worried if you cover the edges of the trees down below. I want them to look very distant and far away in the background. As soon as you've applied a thin even coat, it's time to test it, and for this I'll use my fingertips. I want to get a little sample and see if I can see my fingerprints. For the lower section I'll be using another clean brush and an even smaller amount of liquid clear. It's essential that the liquid white and liquid clear are applied very sparingly. If your painting's too wet, you'll have trouble making everything stick. I'll just go up into the edge of the tree line and just push back any of the liquid white that got in the way. Here's my palette for today's painting. I start with the essential colours and add the others later on. But my first colour is going to be phthalo blue. I'm going to carry on using my old 1-inch brush that I applied the liquid white with. Take a small amount and pull it down well, and then tap it out to drive the paint into the bristles. Start in your corners. If the colour's too strong, I can blend it down into the liquid white a little easier. But I might just take a little bit off on a paper towel first, rather than fight with it all the way down to the bottom of my canvas. Now, let's try blending that sky again. Lots of little crisscrosses. Top tip here though, look out for these very dark triangles in the corners. I want to blend them out, so just take your brush and scrub at them a little bit more. And you can see the liquid white works perfectly to blend my sky. As I come down, I leave the odd patch of light coming through here and there. You may not have realised it, but the liquid white makes lovely clouds. Time to paint a mountain. For this I need to mix up a base colour. Prussian blue, black, Van Dyke brown and some alizarin crimson. I want a nice deep inky blue colour for this. Spread your paint down flat and use just the point of your knife to make a little dot of paint. Time to lay out our mountain. I don't want to go too close to the top of the canvas, so I leave about 3, maybe 4 inches, and I want to go across about a quarter of the way across from the left. I put a little dot for the top peak, another little dot for a lower peak, and maybe a dot here for the third peak, all at slightly different heights. Now go back and collect a small roll of paint, about as big as a fat matchstick. Then with your finger on the back of the knife, really press down into the canvas. I want to force this paint down into the weave of the canvas so it stains the painting. I'll do the same for this little peak. Again, finger on the back of the knife, push that paint down well and scrape off the excess as you go. I want to be a little higher on the left and a little lower on the right, just for a bit of variety. Link these two up and then scrape out all this surplus paint. Make any little adjustments so they don't look like little teepees, and then remove all of this excess paint. Again, finger on the back of the knife. I can't emphasize this enough. The idea is to stain the canvas, not to leave a thick layer of paint. You'll also notice that there's very little liquid white on my painting. If it were too wet, my colours wouldn't be dark, they would be sort of pale grey in colour. Scrape off these last little bits, and remember, keep all of the dark colour in the very top of your mountain. The final step is just to brush out any of the surplus paint. Again, I just want to create the shape of my mountain. You can almost see these peaks appearing in front of your eyes. It's like magic. Now for some highlights. I'm going to take some titanium white and a dot of bright red. I want to just warm up my highlight, but I don't want a pink mountain, so just a speck. For the shadow side, titanium white and some phthalo blue, leave it all streaky, and I'll grey it down slightly for a shadow colour with some original mountain mix. I want my mountain peak on the right to appear to be further away. I'll introduce a snowy ridge along that scratch mark. Now, to better explain how this mountain is going to work, I divide my peaks into two, highlight sides and shadow sides. I'll do the same for this little peak. The sun from the right is in highlight and this side will be in shadow. Now let's rub out these little marks. They were only for the tutorial. You don't need to do them on your own mountain. Slide your knife up and gather up a small roll of highlight colour. This is going on the right side of my peak. I want to make sure the paint is in a nice little round bump. I'll try and get a close-up of that later on. Now, with super light touch, just finger and thumb, hold your knife, put the point of your palette knife at the peak of the mountain and hold the handle away from the canvas. And then, as you roll down the canvas, allow the handle to drop. So you start with the handle steep and then you flatten out at the base of the stroke. Let's gather some shadow colour, and this time I'm going to be going to the left. Just touch and with a light pull lift off quickly. I don't want a lot of snow here. I've reloaded with highlight again. Point to the knife, peak of the mountain, and again hold the handle away from the canvas and allow it to flatten as you roll to the base of the mountain peak. It takes a little practice, but just remember, hold the knife gently and let the paint do the work for you. Again, slide to the left for the shadow side and allow some of the original base colour, that dark inky blue colour, to peek through. We don't want to ice a cake. Now for the main peak. Here's that close-up I was promising you. I want my paint standing up in a nice little bump, like a roll of paint sitting right on the edge of the knife. It's important you have a nice even roll from one end of the blade to the other. Nothing on the back, I kept that clean. Now, point to the knife, peak of the mountain again, light touch, and tip your handle away from the canvas. Most important that you hold it away. Touch, no pressure, and as you slide down the mountain, allow the handle to drop towards the canvas. I barely hold my palette knife when I'm doing this. If you squeeze too tight, the paint won't break. There. Let's create that little snowy ridge that'll push our mountain on the right further back. I carry on adding rolls of highlight and shadow to my mountain, working alternately left and right. Now I add some more snow here, and I think there's another little peak just a bit below where I'm working, so I want this paint to run out a little bit here. Think a couple of steps ahead. Don't just fill it all up with colour and then look back and think, whoops, I should have left a gap. Now for my shadow colour. I think that might be a little bit too close in terms of value to the highlight side. I might come back and grey that down a little bit. You want a good contrast between the highlights on the right and the shadows on the left. Let's just do this little peak here, and again, more shadow to the left. You can see that my left and right sides look a bit too similar in terms of colour. I'll definitely grey them down slightly, and I'll show you a neat little trick in a moment. Let's drop in this little bit of shadow colour here, just to fill the gap. Now, I'm going to grey down my colour a little more and use the small roller of the knife just to gather a little bit, and just where these two colours meet, where the highlight on the right meets the shadow on the left, grey the ridge down a little bit. You don't need to change everything, just where those two colours bump into each other. And again, just like magic, you create an amazing mountain shape. Don't be afraid to play with your colours. Worst come to worst, you scrape it off and do it again. Once you get used to playing with mountains, you never want to stop. If you enjoy my tutorials, don't forget to leave a like. That's a thumbs up. It tells YouTube I'm doing something which you value. They'll share it to other people and it'll help the channel grow. If you want to do a little more to support the channel, you can also buy me a coffee. I actually spend the money on tubes of paint and materials. There's a link in the description below. Thank you. To finish off my mountain, I've got a nice new brush. I just want to tap out the base and create some misty effects down here. I'll carry on using that brush to create some foothills. I want some little distant fir trees, maybe a little forest at the base of the mountain. Sap green and a little tiny bit of that mountain mix colour just to darken it down slightly. Even a hint of cad yellow. Now push your brush well into that paint to create a little ridge of colour on the edge of the bristles. Follow the lay of the land, so down and to the right for this little line of trees. Add more lines of trees as though they were growing down the mountainside. I let my colour run out so they look like they're fading away in the background. I'm going to leave a few gaps here and there. Use the very corner of that brush just to do a few little upward flicks. Make some little tiny points. They look like very, very small distant fir trees. I'll carry on adding fir trees to the left hand side as well, touching and flicking up the colour as I go. Time to mix up a new colour. Van Dyke brown and sap green. This wants to be a sort of sludgy green colour. Sounds horrible, but it's actually good for the water area. I'm going to use the brush I used to apply the liquid clear, so it doesn't have any colour on it yet. And I want to tone this whole area down to a green tone. Now, at first glance, it looks like there's nothing there, but you see when I dip my finger in it, there's a strong green colour. I'll test it here, and you see more oil than colour, so that's not very good. I'm going to cover this entire area with this green tone. I'll let this colour drift up until it reaches the top of the trees. That little gap I'm going to bridge with some small upward strokes. I want them to look like distant trees, so soft and feathery, not too detailed. Now, let's darken this colour a little more. I'll use some more of my mountain mix. I want a deep green colour for some background fir trees. I'll use my fan brush and I'll go through it, give it a little wiggle, make sure the brush is loaded to a chiselled edge. Now, I hold the brush at an angle and strike downwards with the edge of the brush. I want to create the illusion that there are lots of little fir trees in my painting, but don't lose all the background ones. They add depth and distance to the painting. Work in layers, slowly building up your painting as you go. Take regular breaks and stand back. Once I finish this, I'll come in and add some misty layers to our painting before adding some more trees and bushes. I'll use my 1-inch brush that I applied my sky with just to tap in some of that colour. If it's not quite bright enough, go into a little bit of titanium white paint and use that to add mist. I want some more fir trees in my painting, but with more detail this time. I re-chisel my fan brush and I'll take one of the background trees and bring it forward through the mist. Now, hold your brush at an angle, handle held high, and use just the corner of the brush to press the bristles against the canvas. As you see, every time I press, I leave a little imprint of the bristles. They look like pine needles. I'll add some more trees, vary the heights. These two look a bit similar in size, so maybe I'll have a bit of a change of heart on one of them and make it taller. Add as many fir trees as you wish, but don't lose the misty layer. In the gaps between, I'll just use little pushing up strokes to create the illusion of some nice bushes and vegetation between the fir trees. I want some tree trunks for my fir trees. I take some grubby white and a little dark sienna. I want a tiny roll of paint on the edge of my palette knife. And here and there down the centre of the tree, just touch, leave a little imprint of the knife. I think the long blade's a bit too big, so I switch to the small blade. We'll be adding highlights to these trees, so the trunk only needs to be seen here and there. I'll add a nice point to my fir tree using the edge of my knife. Just run up the centre of the tree. I've dry cleaned my fan brush to remove some of the heavy dark green colour, but I'll go through my cadmium yellow and it'll tone it down a little bit. I'll even take a little Indian yellow into my colour. Give the paint a little push. You want a little ridge of paint right on the edge of the bristles. Now, remember the light comes from the right hand side, so it's mainly the right side of my tree that gets to see the highlights. Hold the brush up at an angle and just touch the top of some of the branches. Top tip, don't be tempted to over highlight your trees. Save some dark. It's your best friend in your painting. I want to load a brighter colour for the bushes at the base of the tree. I've taken some white into my Indian yellow colour to give this really bright mustardy orange colour. And I just touch the tops of some of these bushes. Once again, top tip, don't over highlight things. Let some dark remain for the little critters to get some sleep. That's what Bob told us, and he was right. I need a riverbank, and for this I'm going to start out with Van Dyke Brown. A little roll on my palette knife. Gently touch and drag the colour across the canvas. Let it break as it goes. The best sorts of banks are the ones you try the least hardest to paint. I find the more I struggle, the worse they get. I've taken my original colour for the tree trunks and I've added a little bit of phthalo blue into the colour. Just a touch. Sounds odd, but I think you'll see when it hits those brown banks, it looks kind of realistic. Just a little grey here and there peeking through. It's strange that some colours seem to work so well, and yet, to our mind, it would be the last thing we would choose. So, don't always reject an abstract colour. They can be your best friend when you're painting. Here's my nice brush that I used to paint the background little fir trees on the mountainside. I want to go in and just grab the edge of my little riverbank and pull down some of those little bits of highlight to create a reflection. When you pull down, just do it once or twice. I'll add a few little waterlines with the edge of my palette knife. Keep them small and level. And if you want, you can let them zigzag across the surface of the water. Once again though, keep them level. I'm dry cleaning my fan brush. I'm going to paint a bigger fir tree and I want to get rid of all the highlights. I go back to my dark green colour and drop one in here, just at the edge of the riverbank. I want to make this look closer than the trees it's standing beside, so it looks nearer to us on the painting, but I don't want it competing with my mountain. I drop in the centre line of my tree, add a tree trunk just as before, and then some highlights as well. Ooh, and I slipped in a little friend, of course, because every tree should have a friend. And what's our golden rule? Save the dark. I think I could add a reflection here down into the water. So I tap in a little bit of highlight colour. Keep it abstract though. You don't need to do very much with this. Just pull down and then finally pull across. And add a waterline or two. And that will finish the background bank off completely. So here's my finished painting so far. I have room on this side for another big fir tree, but there's something about this area that bothers me. It's just too stripy. I want to tone it down. I'm going to use my sky brush with the blue and white on it and a little more titanium white paint to just calm it down. Be gentle when you do changes like this because there's always a chance that the painting could become a little bit muddy. Load your brush carefully and just tap over some of the original colours. I think that's starting to look better, a bit less dominant and a bit more distant and a bit more misty and snowy. I take time to check my painting looks right to my eye before I put on the final big tree on the right. It would be very difficult to make any changes once that's in place. I'll lift up and make a few little fir trees. Let's add a riverbank to the right hand side. For this I've got my 1-inch brush back that I did the original dark green colour background with, and I've loaded it smooth side up. And I'm going to go in and just press into the canvas and create a lovely stippled effect. It's hard to see when you're painting dark on dark, but you'll see it again in a moment when I put the highlights in. I'll add a fir tree as well. Top tip here, you don't have to do it in one go. Sometimes you need to go back over it several times. For instance, these trees look too similar in terms of size and width. I'm going to make this one taller and I'm going to paint over it a third time. So I grow it gently, bit by bit. Just as before, add a tree trunk and highlights. I might make this one a little brighter on the right to make it stand forwards in the painting, but it's the same process all the way through. Let's highlight these bushes. I've taken my nice 1-inch brush and I'm going to groom it one direction through my highlight colours. Notice I've gone rounded side first. I want to go rounded side up. Gently press against the canvas. The dark green colour is very dry and sticky, and the highlight colours will stick easily. If they don't stick, add a tiny drop of thinness to the paint and make it softer. I'm going to add some final details using my palette knife here. Just push up and maybe add a few little bits of extra detail by adding little dots of green to the top of some of these little stems and stalks. But it still didn't quite ring out enough. It wasn't quite catching my eye. I've gone back to Indian yellow and a touch of white. Let's touch a few stalks and put some little flower heads on. I don't know what sorts of flowers these are, but they're the right flowers for my painting. And that's it. My version of the Bob Ross classic Valley View. So there you have it. My version of a Bob Ross classic Valley View. A suggestion by one of you, the audience. Stick around and watch another video where I'll be using my palette knife to paint another mountain. Happy painting, people.